Today's interview is with Bob Anderson of Ada, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Bob, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in August of 1948 in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And did you grow up in Kalamazoo?
For probably 3 or 4 years, and then my father went back into the Air Force. He was a veteran of World War II and was getting tired of the rigmarole of civilian life. He was a pilot, so he applied for, and the Air Force granted him to return to duty, so he went back in the service and ended up retiring from the Air Force.
Okay. Now, did he rejoin while the Korean War was going on?
I think it was, of course I was little, so
right.
I didn't, I think towards the tail end maybe of Korea. So again, he was, although he was a pilot, he was not a combat pilot. He was a personnel and transport pilot.
Yeah.
So.
And they needed a fair number of those while the Korean War was going on, probably. So.
Yeah, and we lived in a lot of different places. You know, we were in Charleston, South Carolina. We were in Florida for a few months while he was transitioning into other types of aircraft. And then the majority of the time before I went into service, he was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. So that's where I went to high school and graduated from in Maryland.
All right. And what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1966 and proceeded to go to junior college for a year. I lived with my uncle, believe it or not, down on the Gulf Coast in Mississippi. He was a professor at one of the colleges in the Gulf Coast Junior College District, and I lived with him, and that was quite an experience.
All right. And then where did you go from there?
Well, then I transferred and I went to Michigan State. Started there in the fall of '67, and I really didn't know how to study, so I didn't know how. I spent a lot of time doing book work. I mean, actually counting the hours and things like that, but I just didn't know how to translate the studying into regurgitation on the tests. So as a result, I ended up getting academically dismissed from Michigan State in the spring of '68.
Okay. Now, while you were on the Michigan State campus, was there much going on by way of peace movement stuff or student protest activities or things like that, much that you were aware of?
If there was, I was really unaware of it. I was, you know, pretty insulated as a kid growing up. I mean, my parents didn't keep me from anything, you know, and I was free to do whatever I wanted to do, but I just kind of oblivious to world events, I guess, if you will.
All right. And did you consider the possibility that at some point somebody might draft you or anything like that?
Well, when I came, my parents again were living in Maryland, so I, you know, after I got dismissed, I packed all my stuff up and came back to Maryland, feeling kind of, you know, like I'd failed something because I'd done so well in the junior college.
Right.
But I could have gone to junior college again in Maryland, but there was something in the back of my mind that says, you know, you're really not ready for this yet. So I talked to my dad quite a bit, and he thought that maybe it would be good if I went in the service, you know, to get some free training. And you know, when I got out of service, if I was no longer interested in college or what have you, at least I would have a trade to go to. So we kind of talked it over, and my father's very handy, so he suggested, well, maybe refrigeration equipment repair. You know, people always need, you know, air conditioners were just kind of coming into vogue in 1968, I guess, and of course everybody has a refrigerator, so so maybe that would be something good, you know. And I didn't know diddly about any of that, but it sounded good, so I enlisted in the Army to be an refrigeration equipment repairman.
And when did you enlist?
I enlisted on my mother's birthday, May 6th of 1968.
All right. Now, this is a point when the Army needed people pretty badly. They had been expanding and so forth, and the Tet Offensive had just gone on and all this kind of stuff. Were you able to actually dictate or select the specific type of training that you received?
I was. I actually had a guaranteed, and I have that home in my paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Still, it was a guaranteed enlistment for that particular school,
Mm-hmm.
which was to be held at Fort Belvoir, which was just across the Potomac River, about 10 miles from my home. So
Mm-hmm.
I thought that would be kind of interesting too. So yes, the Army guaranteed me that I would go to refrigeration equipment repair school.
All right. Now, where in fact did they send? Where did they send you for basic training?
I took basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
Home of the infantry. And then I took, had I gone to the refrigeration equipment repair program, I would have then gone to Fort Belvoir.
Mm-hmm.
But during the reception station period, many of us take tests, and I had passed or scored high enough on the testing to be considered for officer candidate school. So I thought, well, if I've got by then, Vietnam was, 2 years ago, Vietnam was a non-event for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Right.
Even though my division, the First Cav, had fought bravely and honorably in the Ai Drang Valley, that was, my senior year in high school, and that was still oblivious to me. But,
Right.
but I had my choice to go to OCS because I qualified, and once I said yes, I'll do that, then I waived my right to go to refrigeration equipment repair school. So after basic training, I went to Fort Dix, New
Okay.
Jersey.
Now, back up a little bit and describe what your version of the basic training experience was like.
Well, the basic premise behind basic training, I think, is that they want to tear you down and expunge all your thoughts of civilian world and turn you into a soldier. So there's a lot of physical, back in those days, they could really yell at you and everything, and now I guess they do, but it's more on the QT now. But, they could call you whatever they wanted to call you, and you really had no recourse other than to say, yes, drill sergeant, and then do whatever push-ups they wanted you to do or what have you. But, it was first aid training and drill and ceremonies, teach you how to march, teach you how to, do the manual of arms with your M14. Rifle marksmanship, of course, was a big thing. But again, not everyone that goes to basic training ends up in a combat arm, infantry, or what have
Right.
you. Many of them did not sign off, and someone went to refrigeration equipment.
Right.
Someone went to welding. Wherever the regular Army folks, whatever they had signed up to do, they went to those various posts and did their thing. But how to find mines in the ground, and we shot 3.5 rocket launchers and M72 laws and pistol familiarization, and so it was oriented towards infantry tactics, target detection, night evasion, escape and evasion,
Right.
things like that.
Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to military life?
I think for the most part my adjustment was fairly easy, primarily because my father was career Air Force, and I had, even though from afar, I had some knowledge of, what you're supposed to do. You don't argue with everybody. If somebody tells you to do something, and Of course, in basic training, they're not going to give you anything illegal. You know, that may or may not have come later. But in basic training, if they told you to get down and do a bunch of push-ups, you know, you got down and did as many as you could, you know. Or if they told you to run around the building 5 times, you know, you ran around the building. I mean, it wasn't, there was no debate with the drill sergeants. You know, if they said, stand on 1 foot over in the corner, you said, yes, drill sergeant, away you went. And that's what you did. You know, you just didn't, if you were smart, you did what they told you to do.
I don't know, did they have people who kind of just didn't get it or put up a pretty good fight?
There were a few that I guess couldn't be broken or didn't want to be broken, and I would suspect that probably the most of those were draftees. You know, they were doing whatever they were doing, and then Uncle Sam knocked on their door and said, you know, you will report to wherever, and they did, and they were rebellious, I suspect, because they didn't want to be there in the first place. You know, my situation was a little different in that I enlisted, so even though my basic feelings might have been similar to theirs, you know, I just kept my mouth shut because I signed up. You know,
And were you in pretty good physical shape at that point? Could you kind of do all the PT stuff?
I would say yes. Much different than I am nowadays, but yeah, running was kind of a non-event thing, and you know, the push-ups, you know, eventually you got pretty good at that. But the only thing I really had trouble with was the overhead, we called them monkey bars, and you had to do that every day before you went to chow, and I wasn't very good at that at first because I didn't have very good upper body strength. But eventually you learned how to do it.
Yep. Okay. Now, how long was the basic training?
It was about 9 weeks, I think, 8 or 9.
And did you go straight from there into OCS?
No, I went straight from there to Fort Dix for advanced training. And in a lot of ways, it was similar to basic. Of course, this is geared toward infantry now because, again, I'd backed out of the other. So it's more weapons, it's more radio procedure, it's not as much drill and ceremony, but, you know, more field exercises and more kind of tactical types of things, and, you know, kind of gearing you up to pretty much most of the people knew where they were going if they were in that infantry AIT company. They were going to Vietnam.
Now, were you being trained by people who had already served there?
In basic training, yes, and a little lesser degree in AIT. The company commander had not been there. Either of my company commanders, either basic or AIT, had not been there. But all of the drill sergeants in basic training had been to Vietnam. And I've got a pretty good memory about all of the names except for AIT, and I don't remember many of their names. But I think our platoon sergeant had been to Vietnam, but I can't be 100% sure of that because he's just kind of a vague memory.
Did they make much of an effort to simulate the physical conditions and situations that you'd encounter in Vietnam?
Well, probably as much as they could. I mean, the physical situation, you know, the terrain or the humidity or the monsoons or those types of things they couldn't replicate.
Right.
And of course, the jungle they couldn't replicate. But barring all of that, for the most part, I think they did a pretty good job.
And did they prepare you to function in civilian areas and things like that? Or?
We actually did 2 or 3 days of training on, I forget, crowd control or something. I forget what they called it, but yes, there was a class on dealing with civilians.
But do they have like a simulated Vietnamese village set up? Because some of the training places did.
Not that I remember. I don't
Okay.
think so. I know some of the other posts, like Fort Polk or something like that, I think they did. But
Yeah, maybe harder to do in New Jersey for some reason.
well, yeah.
All right. Now, once you complete AIT, then what's the next stage?
Then it seems like I had a couple, 3 days before I had to report to Fort Benning. And I reported there in the middle of September, I think it was, first week in September, something like that, for Infantry Officer Candidate School. And there were about 120 of us that started, and of course their focus was turn all of you into lieutenants of infantry. And the class day was long. The academics were hard for some, but I didn't have any trouble with the academics. I didn't have any trouble really with the physicality of it. Some folks did, but it was geared strictly to take probably by now 16, 17-week Army kid and make him a rifle platoon leader.
Right. Now, were most of the people you were with college graduates, or were they kind of like you and maybe had some college or a little bit of that? Or
I would say in my platoon, and I would guess there were maybe 20 of us, probably half were college graduates, and then the other half probably were like me, 1 to 2 years of schooling.
yeah, because traditionally OCS had been in a lot of situations primarily for college graduates, but they adjust the standards depending on how many people they need in part.
Well, I suspect that's true. You know, OCS and the military academies and ROTC were the primary, and still are, the primary commissioning sources for all branches of service. But, and a lot of the guys were married too, at least in my platoon. Probably 30% of the guys were married. And again, if they were college graduates and they were married, they were in there because they were drafted. They didn't, raise their hand with a 4-year degree and working in a good job somewhere and say, well, yeah, I think I'll go in the Army. That sounds good. So Uncle Sam knocked on their door too, and many of them brought their wives down, and I'm sure it was quite difficult to have your wife, 5 miles away, just off post, and here you are stuck with 100 other guys, But
Now, in what ways were they giving you kind of a specific training geared toward Vietnam? What kinds of things were they trying to prepare you for?
well, it was kind of more of the same, but more intense. Meaning more of the same, more infantry oriented. There was a lot of map reading. There was artillery firing. We had to learn how to adjust fire with the 81 millimeter mortar. Tactical situations. A lot of it was classroom too. They're showing a film on TV or something, and all of a sudden they stop, and then they call Candidate Anderson, company commander's now been killed, and what do you do next? And then hopefully I was awake when they called my name, and as I was able to give them something, and then they would dissect what I'd given them, and then they'd roll the film to see if what I'd given them was what was supposed to have been done. And the few times they called on me, I was A, awake, and B, able to give them the proper result. But when you're you being a professor, you know this too. I'm sure you can look out from the lectern and see some students who were dozing off, and it was go 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 from the time the reveille started at 0500 or what have you to lights out at 2100 or 2200 200, whatever it was. And, you know, you run to wherever you're going, and it's hot in the fall in Georgia, and then you get in an air-conditioned building, and you sort of, sometimes it seems like your fanny hit the seat, you know, you're conked out. And they had ways to deal with that too. It was humorous in some regards. Sometimes they would just speak out, you know, okay, for all of you who are awake, ignore my next command. And then he'd yell out, on your feet, you know, and of course only the ones, you were conditioned to that. So if you were half asleep, you didn't hear the previous command. So, you know, if half the class stood up, you know, then they got chastised a little bit. It was humorous in some instances. But.
All right. How long did the OCS last?
OCS was 23 weeks, I believe it was.
Okay. So it's not quite like the World War II model of the 90-day wonder.
No.
No.
We still received that moniker, but so I guess we were twice as good.
There you go. All right. Now, once you get to the end of that, do they give you a furlough or something before they assign you, or what happens?
They did. Orders came down. You know, some guys stayed right at Fort Benning to go to the tactical department or something. I stayed right at Fort Benning to go to a basic training unit and be a training officer, but there was a week or two in between.
Mm-hmm. Now, how long did you stay on as a training officer?
I graduated on the 29th of March. I probably reported there, say, mid-April. Mm-hmm. So I was there about 4 months when I came down on orders for Vietnam.
Okay. Now, what was life like on sort of the other side of it? Now, you're training other people.
Well, the role of a second, excuse me, the role of a second lieutenant in a basic training company is kind of like what you used to say about children, you know, be seen and not heard, you know, because we were now gentlemen by an act of Congress, but many of us were unsure of ourselves, and of course you had the drill sergeant cadre there that really knew what they were doing. So if you were smart, you kind of got out of their way and let them do what they were supposed to do, and you just watched and learned from that. And that's really what I tried to do. There was we had a good company commander. He had served with the 101st Airborne, and our first sergeant was a two-tour Vietnam guy, and he'd been in Korea as well, and all of the other drill sergeants had been to Vietnam, so you know they knew what they were doing, and they didn't need me to tell them what to do. So I tried to stay out of their way.
All right. Now, did you have any actual responsibilities then?
Well, you get a ton of responsibilities. You know, you're the mess officer, and you're the Army Emergency Relief Officer, and you're the, I can't even remember, the blood drive officer, and I mean, there's a whole host of things that you have to do, and those are just three. I can't even begin to list all of the extra duties that you have.
So there's a lot of kind of administrative and bureaucratic work and that kind of thing, and in a way that may be what you're best suited to do at that point because you haven't been anywhere yet.
Oh, right. And they're trying to give you some responsibility just to, not necessarily to build up your self-esteem or anything like that, but just to make you feel comfortable with the fact that, okay, Jim, I need you to go over here and take 3 guys and do this. Mm-hmm. And, you know, unless you'd been in a working environment and had been a supervisor, most of us had never asked or told or cajoled people to do things. So, you know, they tried to kind of break you in easy and just make you feel comfortable inside your uniform that says 80% of the people on this base have to salute you now, you know, so.
Yeah. All right. Now, you're in sort of an odd situation in a way, I would think, because you're aware that sooner or later you're going to go to Vietnam, but rather than being packed off right away, you're in a way kind of cooling your heels at Fort Benning. Did you think about that much one way or another, or did you just figure you'd take things as they came?
Well, once you became an infantry, once I said I wasn't going to go to be a refrigeration equipment repairman, then my path was chosen. There was no question in my mind that I was ultimately going to end up in Vietnam. And again, I didn't dwell on that at all. I mean, it is what it is. I raised my hand, and here I am. And if they keep me here for 2 years, then that's what I would have done. And in fact, the senior lieutenant in our company had been there exactly that. When he graduated from Armor OCS, he stayed right at Fort Benning. He was in that company the whole 2 years, never went anywhere. But I didn't have any grand illusions that was going to happen to me. I was just doing the best I could as a second lieutenant, and if it came, then I would go on to the next step and do the best thing I could do.
So what was your reaction when the call actually did come?
I was apprehensive, of course. By then, it's a whole different than you were in the civilian. Now you're getting the Army Times every week, and you open up to the middle, and you don't have any killed or whatever. And 4 of those were officers. And, I guess I was. I don't know if I was glad. I guess I knew that I was going to go there eventually, or was pretty sure I was going to go there. So, I've been here long enough. I've got this duty assignment down pat. So, let's go do what I was really trained to do. See what happens.
Now, how do they physically get you out to Vietnam?
Well, you came down on orders, and you had to report to, or I had to report to Travis Air Force Base.
Where
California.
Is that? Okay.
And
did they fly you
I
then?
flew out there. I don't even remember how I got out there. To be honest, I didn't drive. Of course, I had a car, but I didn't drive out there. So, and I didn't take a train, so I must have flown.
But you don't have any particular recollection of the flight?
I don't have any particular recollection of that.
Do you remember actually arriving in Vietnam?
I do remember that, and a lot of folks remember that it was smelly and it was hot and everything, and I don't remember the smell. It was night. It was dark. I do remember the bus ride to the 90th Replacement Battalion, and all of the bus, and many people will say this, the windows were open, of course, but there was heavy mesh screen over the windows. And I think one of us, asked the bus driver, what's up with that, Well, that's to keep VC or somebody from throwing a hand grenade inside the bus. Oh, I guess this is a real situation now. They've got screened-in buses so people can't throw grenades in and kill us.
Now, were you in the Saigon area at this point? Or?
Benoit.
Okay.
90th Replacement Battalion was where everybody newly arrived in country went to, and then from there you went wherever you went.
Now, how much time did you spend at the replacement battalion before they shipped you out?
Probably 3 days. Seems like I recall about 3 days. Then we're getting uniforms, and of course none of us knew where we were going initially. And a couple of days later, you came down on orders, and I was assigned to the First Cavalry Division. So
now, in some situations, some replacement officers actually were asked to kind of list what their preferred assignments would be and pick 3 units. Did they have that for you or not?
Well, that was in OCS where you'd listed your top 3, and I don't even remember. I don't think Vietnam maybe was number 3. I had Germany. Or,
But within Vietnam, you weren't picking what division to go to or anything like that?
well, the only, when we went to what they called the First Team Academy, and the soldiers reduced that to FTA, you know, which was the moniker of
Yeah.
screw the Army, basically. When I got there, they asked us what unit we wanted to go to. And I didn't know units from anything. I you know, some guys actually enlist, you know, West Pointers, you know, they're indoctrinated, you know, for a lot longer than we were.
Right.
You know, I want to go to Custer's unit, or I want to go to, you know, the 5th Regiment or what have you. But they had a kind of a map of the area, and I remember looking at the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regimental area, and I thought, well, their headquarters is surrounded by a whole bunch of fire bases, and I thought, well, that'd be, you know, well, I know, you know, that might be a safe place to pick. So my first choice was the 2nd or the 7th, but they'd already decided where I was going. That was actually embedded in code in the orders that I got. If I could ever find a key to that code, it would be kind of interesting. But I didn't go to the 2nd or the 7th. I went to the 1st or the 7th, but that was no big deal either. And we were at the First Team Academy for probably about 3 days, and you know, they gave us a weapons familiarization, and we shot an M79, and we did some repelling, I guess. And I think more than anything, it was just to get acclimated to the heat.
Yeah.
And then, you know, after that 3 or 4 days, you know, they said, okay, you're going to 1st to the 7th. Okay, you know, and I got on a C-7 Caribou. You know, they led us by hand, you know, because there's nothing dumber than a second lieutenant, you know, especially in a combat environment. Well, you're going to the 1st of the 7th. Well, how do I get there? And, oh, we'll take you down back to Benoit, and we'll tell you, take you right where you need to go, and then eventually there will be a plane going to Quan Loy, and make damn sure you're on it. Okay.
And then what region of Vietnam was your unit based in at that point?
This was in 3 Corps down south, north, and probably northwest of Saigon.
Okay, so kind of between Saigon and the Cambodian border, sort of? Or?
Yeah, probably 15 miles from Cambodian border.
Okay, and what was the physical terrain like in that area?
Immediately around the brigade base camp, it was right in the middle of a rubber plantation. But the farther out you got to the individual fire bases were you know, single to triple canopy bamboo or trees, and then bamboo interdispersed, and you know, big clearings here and there.
And was it fairly flat in that area?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay, and so you go out to the brigade headquarters, and then do you stay there initially, or do you go out to your battalion?
No, they took me to, again, I took that Caribou ride to Quan Loy, and somebody knew I was coming, and you know, I jumped off the helicopter and walked up to the little hut there, and there was a E4, E5 sitting there, just, you know, of course, you know, it's like you've been transported to the moon, you know. You don't have anybody that you know, and just, okay, Anderson, you're going there, and I'll take you down, and you get on this plane, and then when you get off, somebody will be there. And somebody was there, and they, you know, you're kind of walking around, your eyes are this big, wondering what the hell have I gotten myself into, you know. And then a guy says, Lieutenant or LT or something, and go, oh yeah, and you're going to the 1st or the 7th? And, yeah, and he says, well, jump in the Jeep. Quarter mile down the road, they took me to battalion headquarters, and you know, I signed in, I guess. I mean, you know, they knew I was there, so I don't physically recall signing in, but and then they said, well, go through this door and Colonel Drudick, he's in this little enclosure back there, and he'll talk to you. And I said, oh, okay. And if you've seen the movie Apocalypse Now, I don't know if you had, but when Martin Sheen finally finds
Colonel Kurtz,
Marlon Brando,
yeah.
and then he's kind of talking, and then Brando kind of leans forward out of the shadows. That was kind of course, that movie came out after that experience, but now that was kind of, looking back on it, that was kind of the experience I had. I'm in there, and Colonel Drudick is kind of in shadow, and then he kind of leans forward. And we talked a little bit, kind of similar to what we're doing now. And then he gave me a Gary Owen crest, which is the regimental crest for the 7th Cav. And he gave me crossed saber, similar to the one, and it had a 1-7, because he was the first of the 7th Commander. And said, I'm assigning you to Alpha Company, and Captain Keene is the CO, and good luck. He shook my hands, and I walked back out front. He said, I guess I'm going to Alpha Company. Of course, they knew that already. And I said, somebody lead me away again, because I have no clue where Alpha Company was, and it was 50 yards away or whatever. First Sergeant was in the rear, and again, they knew I was coming. And spent no more than 2 days there, getting helmet and getting a rifle and getting a poncho liner and getting a pack and getting some food, and then the company was being resupplied on either the 2nd or the 3rd day. I don't remember now. And then they said, well, tomorrow morning we'll take you out to the company. And so I can't even remember now where I slept, but so, the next morning I gathered up all my stuff, and we went out and took the Charlie command and control helicopter. That's usually the first one that's going to the field, and jumped on that. It took us out to Fire Support Base Westcott. That's where we're operating out of at the time, and I jumped off with the other guys, and I said, now what? And he says, well, now we kind of wait until the log bird, the resupply helicopter, shows up, and then the company will, which was out in the field, will be moving to what they call a log site, a resupply site, and then we'll take out the the mail and the food and all of the stuff that had been requested the night before, plus you. I said, okay. So it seemed like it was a couple hours, I guess, before the Charlie bird showed, or the log bird showed up, and they said, okay, ALT, we're going now. And got on the helicopter and took me out to where the company was.
All right.
Got real for me then.
Okay. So what happens when you get out there?
Well, a couple of things. It was an interesting helicopter ride. I think the crew chief saw that I was brand new, and he probably radioed to the pilot, and he said, we got a brand new FNG lieutenant here. Let's give him a ride. Maybe we can make him toss his cookies or something. That's the only thing I can think of, because we backed out of the revetment, and he pulled pitch, and we went down the runway, and then we were doing this and flying nap of the earth, and I thought it was great. It was like a roller coaster ride, and I was sitting on a few boxes in the center of the thing, with my feet stuck out so I wouldn't go tumbling out the door. And I guess they finally tired of that, figured that, well, we're not going to make you barf, so. That's the only thing I can think of, because every other helicopter ride I had was never, low, up, down, or sideways and banking. So that's the only thing I can think of. But they dropped me off, and I said, of course, I knew Captain Keene was the company commander, and I said, well, where's Captain Keene? And they said, well, he's over there. He's that guy kind of standing up now without the shirt on. So I went over there and reported to Patrick J. Keene, captain of armor, born in Garryowen, Ireland, actually. He was. But I didn't find that out till later. But so he said, welcome to Alpha Company, you know.
And did you have a job with Alpha Company?
I did. He assigned me as the mortar platoon leader. And I thought, this is not going to be good for me or for anybody else. You know, that wasn't I mean, we had familiarization and everything. I knew about it, but that's not really what I wanted to be, I guess. So I said, okay, where are they? He showed me where they were, and at that time we were humping the 81 millimeter mortar in the field, and you know, the base plate was, I don't know, 80 pounds or something, and the tube and the tripod and the aiming stakes, and everybody in the platoon had to carry 2 mortar rounds, it seemed like. And I was a mortar platoon leader for about till the next resupply. And again, I think it was more, and we did fire it a couple times, but it was more acclimation to being in the field. Now you got all your rucksack stuff on. Now it's kind of real. And if something happens, you know, you'll not be up front necessarily. You'll be back enough where you can see what's going on. And then, like I say, that only lasted like till the next resupply, I think. And then the second platoon leader was sent back to become the executive officer, and I moved up to be his replacement as second platoon leader.
Okay. Now, with the mortar platoon, in the time when you were with the mortar platoon, did much of anything happen? I mean, did they get into any fights or anything like that?
We fired it more just for, I think, primarily to get rid of some of the weight. I mean, you didn't fire it without the company commander's permission, of course. But I think it was more of that. You know, we're going to be moving out there and, you know, 4,000 meters away or something, so let's drop 3 or 4 rounds on in there and announce that we're coming, I guess. But and of course, you know, the guys that run the mortar platoon, they, you know, just said, okay, we're going to shoot here, and we knew where we were, and they knew what to do. And again, I didn't have to double check the FDC or any of that stuff. You know, here's the deal, and you know, charge 2 or whatever, and it'll shoot the mortar around 4,000 meters, and or whatever it was, and so they did their thing.
Right. So you get orders from someplace else to use the mortars or requests or whatever, and then they just do it?
That would have been all kind of unknown to me. You know, he would. We weren't on the move when that was happening. You know, we were. It seems like we got resupplied when I joined the company, and we stayed there that night. And then the next morning, the patrol was going out, and Captain Keene wanted to shoot some 81 high explosive out into that vicinity, and it seems like that's what we did. It wasn't an actual in-contact fire mission or anything like that. So.
Yeah, so it's relatively quiet at the point when you join them.
Yeah.
Okay, then what was it like meeting your platoon then when you go take over there?
Well, I had 2 E6s. One was the platoon sergeant. One was the guy that was kind of training, I guess, to be the platoon sergeant. And then there was the dumbest lieutenant on the planet. You know, that would have been me, because here I am, it's day 4 or something.
Now, did the fellow you were replacing stay a little bit to get you oriented, or just move right out?
He moved right out. Yeah.
So does anybody explain to you what you're supposed to be doing?
Well, you're the platoon leader, and now you have 5 months of commissioned service, and you know that you're now the guy that is in charge. But nobody really said this is the deal. But again, I'd like to think smart enough as opposed to dumb enough to just, that first morning when I'm really in charge, Captain Keene says, okay, you're going to go out and you're going to do a 1,000-meter patrol out and back and blah, blah, blah. And you're going to go light, which means, you're just going out with your weapons and your ammo, your pack and all of that is going to stay behind. And we had a scout dog with us at that time, or with the company. Take the dog with you. I said, okay. So, I got Sergeant Eichley and Sergeant Spencer, and I said, okay, here we are, and we've got to go out 1,000 meters, go over 1,000 meters or whatever, and then come back. And I said, okay. And I said, we leave in 10 minutes or whatever. I said, okay. And then the dog handler was there, and I said, this is what we're going to do, I guess. And he said, okay. He knew why he was there. He used to walk around up front, up close, so, the dog can smell, or, when the dog smelled something, she went into what they call an alert status, freeze and what have you. So away we went.
Now, did the sergeant sort of, tell you where to go in the line or anything like that, or did you just kind of all start going out, or?
I don't know if they did. I don't remember if that was the first patrol where I started walking where I did, but if it wasn't, it was shortly after that. And we'd have a point man, we'd have what we call a slack man. Slack man basic job was to kind of cover and kind of keep track of the route you're walking. And then I had the squad leader, and then me. So it either started with that patrol or shortly after that I walked forth, because you can't run anything if you're at the rear,
right?
And you don't know what the hell's going on if you're at the rear. Sometimes you don't know what the heck's going on when you're fourth, but you've got a better chance to know what's going on the closer you are to the front.
Okay. Now, did you have a radio operator with you?
I did. And Gary May was my radio operator, and he was right behind me. So we'd gone maybe 700 meters, and the dog alerted. And probably at that time, I was probably sixth in line, because the dog would have been in front of me. And we didn't always operate with dogs. In fact, as I recall, that was probably the only time. And so the dog freezes up and locks, and going, what the heck is going on with this, And then people that had worked with dogs before knew what was going on. And they said, well, the dog's alerted. Well, what does that mean? Well, he smells or senses or sees something. I go, my mind says, oh, goody, now what? Now what do I do? It's like the film is running, and click, they stop it. Okay, not now Candidate Anderson, now it's Lieutenant Anderson. Okay, LT, what are you going to do? So I called Sergeant Eichley, and I said, can you come up here? And he did, and he said, what's going on? I said, well, the dog alerted. And, this was a non-event to him, because he had like 6 months in the field or something. I said, what do I do? He says, well, normally what we would do is we would recon by fire. And I go, well, what the hell does that mean, We do recons before fire an OCS or anything like that. You know, this is OJT for the most part.
Right.
And he told me what to do, and he said, but before we do that, you should radio back to the company commander and tell them what you're going to do. Otherwise, they'll hear the M60 go off, and they'll think we're in contact or something. I said, okay. So I radioed Captain Keen and said, you know, the dog's alerted. We're going to recon by fire. And he said, okay. And we did, and we got no return fire or anything. And okay, we'll keep driving on, you know. So, you know, we went another whatever it was, and then made our right turn, and made our big sweep, and came back. Years later, guys were telling me that they couldn't believe that first patrol that they ever went on with me. They thought, crap, you know, because I guess the previous guy, Lieutenant Fowler, you know, if they were going to do one of these things, they'd go out 500 meters and sit down and yuck it up. So here I am, you know, it's 1,000 degrees, and we're doing what I was told we were going to do, and they were all cranky. Nobody ever said anything. But so nothing happened, which I'm thankful for, because you know, I was just brand new. I didn't know anybody's names or anything, you know. So.
Now, how long did it take before things got a little more interesting?
It was about 3 weeks, and we moved from Firebase Westcott to Firebase Jerry, and this was in the about the middle of November, maybe. And I'd forgotten to say that I'd gone to jungle school down in Panama, and so I didn't actually get to Vietnam until first 10 days of October. But we air assault. We were picked up in the field and air assaulted into a new area of operations at a fire base called Jerry, and it was late in the day. And as we were, my platoon was the last one in, and they just dropped us off, and then we got mortared at the front of because we're outside the wire and trying to figure out which way we're going to go. And as we found out later, you know, they mortared Jerry pretty much regularly, but with the you know, they're always trying to either hit the fire base or hit helicopters or what have you. But all of the rounds hit up front, and we had 4 or 5 guys fairly seriously wounded. One guy was blinded, I guess, for life. And you know, it's 3 or 4 rounds, and then that's the end of it. And then you know, we get them inside the fire base to the doc, the doctor, medical doctor, and then we go on our way, and then they get treated and sent back to.
So how many men do you have in your platoon at this point?
Well, I probably had. Well, again, this was the whole company that was hit.
Right.
These weren't any of my guys.
Right.
But
Okay.
So the company probably in the field had about 110 maybe, and I had maybe 25.
Okay.
I think the most I ever had in the field was about 25. The fewest I had was about 17. So we marched off the fire base, and then there was just sign everywhere, and then we set up, and you know, nothing happened that night, and then the next day late we were walking, and then the point, I didn't have point, my platoon didn't have point, but a couple of NVA ran up a little trail to the right, and the point element fired on them, and they didn't hit them or anything. And then, so we were going to see where they went. So the point element got up to that trail, got off the trail, and walked up 30 or 40 meters, and somebody probably finally said, you know, to Captain Keene, you know, get farther away from this trail, because it's usually not, you know, first of all, we just saw somebody there, and we know that they know we're here because we fired on them. So it's not a good idea to be this close to a trail, because you essentially could be walking into an ambush. So I'm assuming somebody told him that, or he realized that. But whatever reason, we got off the trail, and then my platoon got right up to that little trail, and I was just kind of standing there looking up the trail, just like, wow. I mean, this trail was like this floor here. I mean, it was that hard packed. You know, 1,000 people could have walked down it. You'd have never known it. It was just beat solid. And I was looking up that trail wondering, well, I'm glad they got off the trail, because you could see it and then kind of disappeared. And that'd be a good place for them to fire on us. And I no sooner had said that than they fired on us, you know. But as quite often happens in those kinds of fleet meeting engagements, you know, bullets are going everywhere, but it's not an aimed response. So the initial firing might be aimed, but the response usually isn't. You know, you're. So we moved off, and again, it was late in the day, and Keene said, well, we're going to set up here, and we did, and then he called me, or we started to, and then he called me over and he said, I want you to go out and up that trail, not on the trail, but up parallel to the trail, you know, 300 or 400 meters, and ambush the thing. I thought, oh, great. I know there's at least 2 of them up there somewhere, but so I said, okay. And, you know, we went up and we found the trail, and then we set up our claymore mines, and then we backed off, you know, the 100 feet or whatever that wire was on the claymore. And we just laid down and waited for...
You want to be careful not to bump your microphone there.
Yeah, I just realized that. Waited for somebody to stumble down the trail. And I guess fortunately nobody did, but I mean, we could hear, and it rained that night too, and the mosquitoes, you know, the whole episode was miserable. But we could hear off in the distance chopping. So they were chopping trees and making bunkers, or doing something with the trees. And we could hear laughing. So I suspect we were probably within, you know, a couple hundred meters of where they were. And then, like I said, nobody came down the trail the next morning. We picked up our stuff and backtracked to the company, and then we went on our way. But that whole place was just crisscrossed with trails, and you could see where they had rested in the night or in the daytime, because they had their little cooking fires that, you know, they weren't warm. They were all done. But I mean, you could see all along that trail where probably a whole company or more of NVA had been in that area. But it was like every 2 days, 2 or 3 days, you know, we'd get fired on, or we'd fire on them. You know, we didn't have any casualties or anything like that, and until about a week into this this new area of operation, we got in a big, horrendous firefight for about 5 or 6 hours. And again, I guess I was lucky, because my platoon was walking last that day, and it was mostly the front 2 platoons that really got into it. We didn't have anybody killed, but we had 16 or 17 wounded that had to have been be medevaced, and it was a long. It was a lot longer day for me, because I wasn't really under the direct fire, and you're just kind of sitting back. You're on guard, of course. You know, you're looking left and right behind you and everything. In fact, I'd never even left where we'd slept the night before.
So were you essentially kind of a company reserve at that point?
Yeah. You know, I did have to send my machine guns up because the other two guns malfunctioned, and my gunners weren't happy at all because they were both almost 7 months in the field, and they'd seen a lot of action, but they went up. They didn't squeak or squawk or anything. And our guns, I think, were the telling tale. My gunners were meticulous about keeping not only their guns clean, but their ammunition clean. And other gunners weren't that meticulous. But we had to pass ammunition up for my platoon at one time because you were in the jungle and you couldn't get ammunition down to
Right.
you. And that got to be a little nerve-wracking when, now we don't, not only do they not have much ammunition up here, now we don't have much ammunition back here. So, but that went on till late in the afternoon, and then we set up right. We didn't move very far and set up basically there. And then the next morning, because second platoon, my platoon, it was the one that was the least beat up. You know, we had to go back. We had to lead the company back into the area, and that was pretty nerve-wracking because the area had been worked over so heavily with airstrikes and Cobras and artillery, and because we were real close to Firebase Jerry, we were only about 3 clicks away from Jerry. So I mean, we had all the battalion organic fire really close by, and the place was just beat silly with, you know, tree. It's like a tornado goes through these places. If you've ever seen that kind of damage of trees, there's no logic to how they go. They're all like pickup sticks. You drop them, and of course, then they're dispersed well at are pieces of enemy soldiers, and bloody bandages, and you know. So we got it hit bad, but they got hit worse, I think. You know, and they were gone, of course. So other than I don't want to say scared, but other than the unnerving part of the whole thing, it was pretty routine, I guess. I mean, okay, we got to go in there, and this is what we have to do.
Did you have any kind of understanding of sort of what the larger purpose of your mission was at that point?
Well, the larger purpose of that particular mission was to just go in there and evaluate what we'd gotten into. But I mean, essentially, you know, we got ambushed. I mean, the first platoon leader, George Atkins, his platoon was walking point, and he did a marvelous job. And the third platoon leader, which was walking second, Freddie Davis, he actually got wounded and never came back to the company. But you know, our missions really were to, you know, aggressively and actively patrol and, you know, find the bad guys, and if you could, you know, raise hobs on them.
Now, was this an area where there were a lot of underground tunnels or booby traps or other things like that?
No, we were fortunate that there were bunkers, and that's what was happening that day. It was a small bunker complex, but no tunnels that we ever found. I mean, most of the tunnels and everything were down by Lai Khe and around Kuchi and all that area, but primarily bunkers fortified fighting positions, you know. And the North Vietnamese, you know, they're excellent soldiers. They've been doing this for 20 years, you know. And camouflage was excellent. And you know, there were times when, you know, you'd just walk up and you'd step, and then you'd look down, and you're standing right in front of a bunker aperture, you know. That happened to me a couple different times. And, you know, I'm fourth. The three other guys who walked by never saw it.
And in those situations, was the bunker not occupied?
It was not occupied, but or as far as I know, it was not occupied. But it was, and of course now I've been the platoon leader for 3 weeks, so now I've got a much more familiarity with what's going on. You know, I know the guys' names, and but George Atkins, he'd been. I remember I was so happy to see him join the company, because that meant I wasn't the bottom. I wasn't the dumbest lieutenant anymore. That was him. But he'd only been there probably 2 weeks when this happened, and he did a marvelous job. And I always wonder, you know, what would happen if that had been me up there. But he actually, his point man actually spotted the NVA Claymore and was able to tell George, and George was actually radioing Captain Keene when they detonated it. So, but at least by then they knew it was there, and they were not staring at it when it went off. So they had, some of them were wounded, but not as bad as if they had just stumbled on it and they'd have detonated it right away.
Right.
But he did a marvelous job.
Now, once you locate a bunker or a place where they're actually fighting from, I mean, can you then call in sort of the heavy weapons to try to blow it up? Or?
Of course, the heaviest weapon you have in a rifle platoon, unless you're carrying the mortar, is your M60 machine gun. And if they're occupied, you know, you want to get as much fire on them as you can, and at least to suppress what they're trying to do to you. And then, if you can, you want to pull back, and then you use your Cobras to, you know, with the 2.75-inch folding fin rockets and the miniguns and things like that. But if you're trying to use artillery, the Cav, under normal circumstances, I know you're working with another veteran, Mike McGregor. He was an artillery forward observer sergeant. He would know. But as I recall, generally you couldn't shoot artillery closer than 600 meters unless you were in contact. And then it had to be danger close, and there were all kinds of rules and things like that. And again, most of these engagements were, the vast majority were 25 meters or less. And I had a lot of confidence in our artillery, but I would never have tried to call artillery that close.
Right.
Unless it was a last resort and you were completely pinned down and you couldn't get Cobras, and you were about out of ammunition, or, I mean, you know, there are situations where you'd have to do that, but being that close, that'd have been about the last resort.
Right. How long did you spend as a platoon leader?
I was a platoon leader from October until the middle of February, October of '69 to middle of February of '70. And then I was taken out of the field, you know, to perform what they call a rear job. You know, you've done a good job out in the field, now we're going to reward you by giving you something that's a little less dangerous. And it was the most miserable job I've ever had in my life. I think I was in charge of, at the brigade base camp, of 1/4 of the base defense. Now again, I was still second lieutenant. All the other guys in charge of this were captains. And they gave me 2 other guys to work with me, and then, so really there were 3 of us, and we worked 21 hours a day. I mean, we had to make sure the trip flares were on. We had to do that, and we didn't have any help. It was just, and to make it worse, I was reporting to the most obnoxious lieutenant colonel that ever wore a silver oak leaf, I think. And we had to report to him every day. And he wanted to know how many trip flares we put out, how many feet of this, and how many, and it just, quite frankly, just got to be too much. I was working my fanny off and making no seeming contribution. Because if I needed anything, I didn't know where to go or what to do, whereas these captains with a million years of service, they knew, they probably even knew some of the guys from previous tours or whatever, so if they needed something, and it just wasn't working. And that lasted for about 3 weeks. And then, and I was still assigned to headquarters company of 1st and 7th, but so I got called up to battalion headquarters. Major Stillman, who was the XO at the time, says, well, I guess good news and bad news for you. And I said, well, you can't send me to Vietnam, I'm already here, so what's the good news, He says, well, this job obviously isn't working, Colonel Labrossi's not happy with you. And I said, Major, I'm not happy with Colonel Labrossi, and I'm breaking my fanny here and nothing's happening. And Stillman said, I know you are, you're working hard, but it just isn't working. And I said, okay, so I'm going to send you back to the field. And inside I go, yes, because I was good at that. So I said, well, I really got only one question. He says, what's that? And I said, am I going to get smashed on my officer efficiency report? And he said, no, you're not. We'll show it casual or we'll do something, but this will be a learning experience for you and you won't get hammered on your OER. And I said, okay, good. He said, oh, and you're not going back to Alpha Company, you're going to Charlie Company. And I go, Charlie Company? And he says, yeah, when you left Alpha Company, we backfilled you and blah, blah, blah. And you're going to go to Charlie Company and then they're going to pull that lieutenant out and he's going to do your job. And I said, do I have to go to Charlie Company? Because I knew their company commander. He'd been the headquarters CO, and he was pretty not with the program. He said, that's where you're going. I said, okay, thanks. And, part of me felt good that, gosh, at least I'm out of this base defense gig. Golly, now I got to go to Charlie Company, and I have to start over training guys and everything. But so I went there, and the next day I guess I went out to the Firebase, and the CO was in the medical bunker, and the battalion or brigade dentist was out there working on him. I remember him sitting in the chair leaning back. I went in to report to him, and he says, oh, okay. Have you ever been in the field before? I said, yes, sir. I was with Alpha Company in the field for, over 4 months. Okay. You're going to be the 3rd platoon leader. And I said, okay, where might I find the 3rd platoon? And he gave me a general idea. Of course, I'd been on and off that Firebase with Alpha Company dozens of times, so I knew right where they were. And I said, who's the platoon sergeant? Oh, okay. So I shuffled over to 3rd Platoon and introduced myself to Pat Hansen, and 3rd Platoon leader, I forget what his name is now. I'll remember afterward, you know. He probably took me around and introduced me to the guys, or maybe it was Pat, I don't even remember now, but he left and he went back to the rear and took over my job. He lasted till he derust, so I guess he did okay. He was drunk most of the time, but maybe that's what it took to do well in that job. I don't know. But so now I'm back with a different company, and company commander that I had seen in the rear area, and it didn't take too long for a couple, 3 or 4 days on the field, and I knew, you know, he didn't know what he was doing. He was an armor officer too, but he was not cut from the same bolt of cloth as Captain Keene, my previous CO. But, you know, do the best you can with the cards you're dealt.
And what kind of situation were you in at that time? Just still
Well,
patrolling jungle, or?
Yeah, I mean, the terrain was similar. There's a lot of bamboo and things like that. There were only 2 times in the field when we were out in the jungle that I ever took my boots off. First was the night before we had that big contact in November. And fire bases would have what they would call mad minutes, where it wasn't the same time all the time. Very rarely did they last a minute. But the purpose of the thing was, A, to shoot up bad ammunition, but really that was purpose number 2. Purpose number 1 was to just shoot fire out everywhere in case anybody was trying to sneak up on you. And if they were, and you were firing them up, maybe that would trigger early, you know, their attack or what have you. But we were so close, like I indicated before to Jerry, that when they were shooting that night, bullets were coming into our perimeter. And I jumped in the foxhole, and the thing was full of termites in the bottom, and they're little pinchers, you know, they like to bite. So I jumped in the hole, and you know, in a matter of seconds, you know, they're biting my feet. I didn't know what it was until the next morning, so I jumped back out of the hole. That was the first time I had my boots off. The second time was with Charlie Company, and it's pitch dark, which you never know how dark it is in a situation like this until it is dark, and literally you can't see your hand in front of your face. So I took my boots off, and I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock, I hear an M60 fire, and it was one of my guns. Oh, shit. So I stumbled around, try to find my glasses, try to find my boots, and I make my way over to the foxhole where my gunner was. And I said, you know, what's going on? He said, well, I thought I saw something out there. And I said, well, why in the hell did you shoot the machine gun? You never give away your heavy firepower position unless, you know, you're really under attack. And then I hear this voice off to the side, because I told him to do a 2.6 or 3.6, and that was Captain Boyev. And I kind of looked at, you know, and again, it's really dark and you can't see. And I said, well, sir, that was a bad idea. Now we're going to have to move this gun in the dark. That's going to make a lot of noise and everything. He said, but there was something out there. And I said, you know, I'm kind of looking and I can't see anything. And I said, where? And he says, well, watch. And he shoots with his 45, and he carried tracers in his 45. And of course, you know, you can see him going out and hitting. And he says, right out there, there's a dead NVA. And I said, I wasn't there, so I don't know. But I said, well, let's do something a little different here. Let's shoot an M79 out there. Oh, okay. So got my thumper guy over there, and I actually did it. I shot the M79 over there a couple times. I said, if there was something there, now it's either A, gone, or it's dead with those M79 rounds. We got to go out there and check. I said, well, what? I said, we don't know what's out there. You know, maybe there is somebody there. Maybe he's just wounded. We're going to go crawling out there? He said, yeah. Come with me. And by now, my guy that became one of my best friends in the service was the first platoon leader. He shows up.
A sort of a spot in your story where you and your company commander are kind of there on the perimeter, you fired off and so forth, and then the lieutenant from the first platoon comes up.
Phil Zook, the first platoon leader, comes over, and as I said, he became and still is one of my best friends from my Army days. He says, what's going on, Andy? And I said, well, Captain Boyev thinks, you know, Phil and I were having a conversation like you are, and Captain Boyev is right there, but we're just ignoring him. Captain Boyev thinks there's, you know, there was an NVA out there. That's why he had the gun open up, and I don't know, Phil probably said something grumbly about, you never shoot an M60 at night unless you're in contact. But, so Captain Boyev's going out there, and I'm going to go with him. I just can't let him go out there. And so Zook says, well, I'll go with you. So here's the company commander. He's crawling. Here's me, the should have known better lieutenant, crawling. And here's Phil Zook, who should have known better. He's crawling. So we're crawling. Of course, we'd let the perimeter know that if you hear something, please don't shoot or throw grenades or something, because you got 3 lunatic officers out here crawling around outside the perimeter. And so and again, from where the gunner was to where Captain Boyev thought this enemy soldier was, you know, 30 meters maybe. I mean, it wasn't a long way, but when you're out in front, in the dark, in front of a rifle company, you know, there's always the chance that somebody doesn't get the word, and you hear something, and all it takes is one guy shooting, and the whole company opens up, you know. So we're crawling, and about, I guess, as slow as you could possibly crawl, and finally, I think I said to Boyev, I said, you know, 6, this is a bad idea. I said, we're out here in front of course, I'm probably whispering it, not knowing if there's anything out there or not, but I said, we're out here exposed. I said, we need to get back in the perimeter, and we'll check it out in the morning. And I guess he finally decided that, boy, this is a dumb idea, all of us out here in front of everybody, and we kind of turned around and crawled back, and then the next morning there was nothing there, no evidence of any blood or anything. So, you know, was there somebody there? I don't know, probably not, but we found no evidence. So I don't know, this was early April probably, when all this is going on. And then the big a big event on the 26th of April. We got in a big horrific firefight again. Phil was out doing a clover leaf. I'd been left behind as an ambush, and then Phil got ambushed, and then I was hurrying back to the company, and Captain Boyev was, as I was coming to the perimeter, he was just going out. He said, take charge of the perimeter. I'm going out and I'm going to get one with my knife. And I said, okay. And, you know, that was just the guy's persona. He was just full of himself. He was a lousy maybe he was a good tank officer, I don't know, because that was his branch, but he was, in my opinion, a crappy infantry company commander. But so that was the last time I ever saw him alive. You know, he went out with part of the 2nd platoon and or with the 2nd platoon, and then I kind of came in and just was listening to the sounds of, at that time, Phil, you know, shooting, and you know, they were shooting B-40s at them, or RPGs and RPDs, the machine guns, and AKs and SKs and the whole 9 yards. And of course, you know, intermittent with all that is Phil shooting back, or his platoon shooting back.
Now, were you in a position to hear whatever he was saying on the radio, or
Yeah.
you on,
Yeah,
came on clip there?
Like, jumped. Well, I was able to hear what Captain Boyev was saying. At some point in all of this, Phil's radio and then his platoon sergeant radio had been shot out. So had no communication with them at all. And then there was a hasty call from Boyev. He said, "We need to come out here. We're pinned down." And I, you know, Roger, you know, be out there momentarily. And so I yelled over to, I'd gotten a new E5 in. Pat Hansen had gotten a rear job, so he had left as platoon sergeant, and Lasco, I think his name was. But so I said, well, get our guys ready. We're going to go out there and do what we can do. You know.
Would you be leaving anybody still at the perimeter when you did that?
Just the 4th platoon
Okay, so there was one more
stayed
platoon left,
behind, and they were a small. They weren't a complete rifle platoon, so they were staying back to guard the, you know, make their own little perimeter, and they had a radio,
Right.
and that really was going to be our last. that really was the last reserves. So as I'm standing up, and we're just getting ready to go out, a B-40 or RPG or something hit close by where we were standing and knocked down 3 or 4 of my guys, and didn't knock me down, but a piece hit me, and then I look, and you know, everybody gets up, but like 5 guys. Oh, shit, you know. So we got the medics over there, and then we went out. Maybe there were 15 of us, because the other guys were wounded and couldn't.
Right.
And I was wounded too, but it was a minuscule wound compared to what most people get. But so it was easy to follow the trail that Captain Boyev and the other guys went, not knowing where anybody was. That was the most expedient, and it may not have been the safest, but at least I could find out where they were by following their trails.
Right.
So we did, and we didn't go very far, you know, 100 meters, because this all happened very close to our NDP. And as quite often happens, you know, there's a lot of firing, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. And about the time I got up to where the headquarters group was, the firing kind of stopped. And I remember our forward observer, we called him Bull. His last name was Durham, and he was a huge fellow, and he was as close to the ground as he could get, and he was probably still 2 feet off the ground. He was just a huge bull of a man. And he looked up at me and he said, "Andy, you better get down. It's really bad up here." And of course, I'd heard all this bad firing, but there wasn't anything happening right then. And then I hear off to my left was a termite mound, a huge termite mound. And behind that was the battalion commander's radio operator, or the guy that had the radio on the battalion net, and he's just screaming into the net, we're all going to be killed, you know, the first platoon is wiped out, you know, and of course by now the battalion commander's on that radio, and this kid is just going nuts. And off to my right, on the other side of Bull, I could see medics working on one of the guys, you know, and they were yelling at him, stay with us, you know, you'll be okay, you'll be okay. And then, so I went over to the termite mound, and I grabbed the radio away from this kid. And I said, this is Cool Killer 3-6 or whatever, you know, I'm up here now, and I'll let you know what's going on when I know what's going on. I just got here. I don't know who's a line 1, who's a line 2, nothing. There's no radio commo between first platoon and me, or first platoon or anybody. 6 is not here, so. and then that was probably a sergeant I was telling that to on the radio, and then the colonel got on the radio, and he wanted to know, you know, what's going on, you know, if I just lost a company, and I said, I just got here. Leave me alone and let me develop what the hell's going on. He says, well, you tell me what's going on as soon as you know. And I said, we'll go. He handed the radio back to the kid, and I said, do not talk on that radio, do not answer. If they call you, don't do anything. And I said, where's Boyev? And the kid says, I don't know. And I'm thinking, well, this is nuts. You're supposed to be with the company commander. And the other guy was on the company net, and he was just sitting there. You know, but now's not the time to tell somebody what they're supposed to be doing, you know. But I'm going through my mind, what? And of course, then I asked him, I said, do you have any commo with first platoon? He said, no, we haven't. And by the amount of firing that had gone on, I thought, well, they're wiped out, you know. So, you know, I put a gun team over on the other side of where the medics were working on a guy, and then I had one kind of close by me, and I said, told my radio operator, I said, you just sit here. I don't know why I didn't say follow me, but I said, I'm going to go up there and find out what the hell's going on, really. Which I guess in retrospect was kind of dumb, because I didn't take the radio operator with me. But so I started crawling up, and I hadn't gotten in the prone position and crawled 10 feet, and it all started up again. And it was real personal at that time, because it seemed like everybody was shooting at me. Because the bullets, I mean, they weren't going by 6 inches away from me. They were going right over the top of my head. And I'm thinking, this is not a good thing, you know. So you know, follow me, the motto of the infantry, you know. So I'm still crawling out there, and then I was kind of thinking, this is a real bad idea. You know, I'm the only, as far as I know, I'm the only one out here, and as far as I know, all the bad guys can see me because they're shooting at me. And then I saw the second platoon leader, Danny Clark. He came low crawling by me as fast as he could low crawl. He said, Boyev's dead. And I said, where's your platoon? He said, I don't have any idea. Boyev's dead. And I said, are you sure? And he said, yeah, I crawled right by him. He's dead. And of course, by now he's, you know, he never stopped to tell me all this. He's just going. And I said to myself, I can't let him get back there and get on the radios. So then I turned around and I crawled back and got behind the termite mound and called the colonel back, and I said, you know, we've got a situation here. I don't know really what's going on. You know, one of the guys says 6 is a line 1, and, you know, then as I'm talking on the radio, I'm watching Manny Torres, you know, he had a sucking chest wound, and the medics did everything they could, but he died, while I was watching. And Colonel Jan, he was just questions. What's going on? You got to find out what's going on. You got to tell me what's happening with 1-6. And I said, I don't know what's happening with 1-6. I said, it may be just 5 of us here. I have no idea. You just got to give me time. I don't have time. The colonel, the brigade. You see, it's the echelons. Here's the Colonel Jan, and here's Colonel Kingston up here. And finally, I hear, break. This is Gary Owen 6 or whatever, and I knew that was the brigade commander. And he says, Red Baron 6, which was Jan, and Jan comes up and he says, this is Gary Owen 6. Get off his back and let him develop the situation. He'll tell you what the hell's going on when he knows what's going on. Leave him alone and let him fight the battle. Roger. And I never had any more trouble from Jan after that. So they're just sitting there, and then my machine gun team all of a sudden yells at me. He says, he says, 3-6. And I was close enough that, we could see each other.
Yeah.
I said, do we have any people out there? And I said, I don't think so. And he says, well, somebody's running. Somebody's running away. And, of course, I didn't know if that was our guys or what. So I said, well, just keep a steady eye. And then all of a sudden I heard kind of movement off to the left, and here comes Zook. He had somehow disengaged and got his people back. And I said, do you have all your people? And he said, yes. And I said, well, where's Clark's people? He said, they're coming. They're behind me. And so then I told both gunners, I said, if you see any movement out there now, fire it up, because it's enemy. All of our guys are back. So then I called Jan back, and I said, okay, I've essentially got good news, First platoon is disengaged, second platoon is behind them. I know I've got one line 1. We've probably got 15 or 20 line 2s wounded. I said, I still don't know the status of 6, but I'll hopefully know something about that pretty soon. So Zook was sitting right there behind the termite mound, kind of, and because he'd taken over one of his machine guns when the gunner got wounded, and he was firing, and then that gun got shot up, and then his radio operator had also been shot. And I said, well, Clark said that Boyev is dead and he's out there. And Phil said, yeah, he probably is. And I said, well, we can't leave him out there. And he said, I am not going back out there, Phil said. And I said, well, we can't leave him out there. Phil said, you can go out there, but I'm not going back out there. So I said, okay. And by then, the firing had kind of stopped, because what my gunner had seen was they had had enough. Of course, by then I'd been calling in Cobras and stuff like that too. So
there had been some kind of
they were in
airstrikes
bunkers.
Yeah. Okay.
And they were the 11th Armored. This was a lot of bamboo around this area. And the 11th Armored Cav had been going through this area with their APCs and their tanks and everything. And the NVA had built bunkers real close to this, thinking that maybe, well, if they went through here once, maybe they'll come through here again, and we'll be right on top of them, and we'll blast them with our RPGs or whatever, and then we'll deed him out. But so I grabbed Laco and I said, let's go out there and see what we see. And I guess he was new enough that he said, okay, you know, rather than, are you nuts?
Mm-hmm.
So we went out there 25 meters, maybe not even that much, and there Captain Boyev was. He was dead as a doornail. He'd been shot through the forehead. Rolled him over, made sure he was dead, I guess. And there wasn't any horror
Mm-hmm.
to it. The thing that was so bizarre that I remember was he didn't have his glasses. And I was, well, where the heck are his glasses? And then so I guess Terry grabbed an arm and or two arms, and I grabbed his feet, or one of each, or what
Mm-hmm.
have you, and we kind of carried him back to the termite mound, and then I radioed to Jan. I said, well, 6 is a line 1, and we've recovered his body, and everybody is moving back to the perimeter. And so there's nothing, you know, you hear the term dead weight,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, you know, 100 and, he was a stocky man, but, you know, maybe he weighed 150 pounds, you know, but that's a lot of weight when you're getting no help,
Mm-hmm.
you know, moving. So I had the gun team. I said, give me your gun. And I said, you two guys carry him back. And we'll just back our way right back the thing, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll be the guy with the gun covering as we move back. So I took the M60, and there was no incoming fire there, but having been once where heavy din of fire, then it stopped, and then heavy din of
Mm-hmm.
fire, and then it stopped, you know, you don't know, so I just fired them up as we went backwards. So.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got back to the perimeter, and by now, you know, we're starting the medevacs. You know, they had to use the jungle penetrator because there wasn't a place for them to land,
Mm-hmm.
so everybody was going up on the jungle penetrator. And bloody bandages everywhere, and it was a real mess. But so
what happens to the company at that point?
well, what I thought was going to happen was, of course, it's kind of the last thing in your mind. You know, essentially, I'd taken over the company
Mm-hmm.
for, you know, a couple hours or whatever. You know, all of this happened a lot. You know, I talked about it in 20 minutes or whatever, but you know, it was a number of hours,
Mm-hmm.
the course of this thing. But so one of the other company commanders who had been the B company commander was the S1, and when he heard all this going, and when he heard that Boyev had been killed, he grabbed his rucksack and ran out and got on the helicopter, and he came out. He had already served 4 or 5 months as company commander, and
Mm-hmm.
he came out and served for 2 months for the rest of the time in Cambodia. And I remember telling one of the guys that was there, Lieutenant Smith, after it was all over, I said, you know, you'll never see another day like this. This is the worst day you'll ever see. And when the company got to Cambodia, that April 26th would have been a good day compared to what
Mm-hmm.
happened to them in Cambodia. They just got decimated in Cambodia. But 3 days after that action, Charlie Company was back on the Firebase. My former company, Alpha Company, got in a similar heavy, ugly contact, probably with the same group of people. Mm-hmm. And they had a lieutenant killed and a buck sergeant killed. And typically when a company got beat up like that, you'd you'd come to the Firebase just to decompress a little
Right.
bit. So we were kind of in the middle of decompressing when Alpha Company got beat up. So they couldn't leave them out in the field, so they brought Alpha Company back in. But they told me that, well, you're going to go back to Alpha Company and be the executive officer, because they were about ready to make that that switch, and then Lou Favuza got killed. So then I became the senior lieutenant, so they sent me back to Alpha Company as XO.
Okay.
So
Now, is Captain Keene still there, or he moved
Captain Keene had derosed about the middle of March, and he was actually the S4 at that time. So he was making sure the battalion was supplied and everything. He was a career officer too, Pat Keene, and retired as a full colonel. And the guy that took over the company after Boyev was killed, Dana Dillon. He was a career officer too, and also retired as a full colonel.
So who did you have then as a captain with Alpha Company when you got
Captain
back there?
Bowen had taken over from Captain Keene, and I was his executive officer. The job of an XO, there's really one job, and that's to go out and take over the company if something happens to the company commander. That's really it. You also have to sign for the property book, all of the weapons, all of the typewriters, all of the starlight scopes, all of that minutia called TA-50, in the stateside, the company commander signs for it, but in a combat environment, or at least in the Cav, in that environment, the XO signed for it. So, I would go out to the field if the company was on the Firebase, I'd go out there every day and then come back and sleep at Quan Loy, the brigade headquarters, where our company was, and then the next day go back out. So it was administrative. The first sergeant really ran the rear, and if you had a good first sergeant, you just let him do his job. And we had an excellent first sergeant, and there was no need for me to look over his shoulder. And so, it's, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a reward for good service or what have you, because you need these slots filled.
Yeah.
But you can be a crummy XO and it would have no effect on your, if you've got a good first sergeant, you could be a crummy XO. But if you were a crappy XO and you had a crappy first sergeant, then the guys in the field didn't get what they needed to get. So that was really my job, to run interference if Top ever had any issues, and he really never did, because most people defer to first sergeants anyway. A good lieutenant will defer to a first sergeant until he finds out if Top is good or bad. If he's bad, then he's got to get involved. But so that's kind of what I did. We went to Cambodia, and again, even though I went into Cambodia, it was essentially every 3 days as the company was being resupplied.
Now, did the brigade headquarters go to Cambodia, or did that just still stay back?
No,
in
they stayed at Quan Loy. The battalion, of course, the battalion had a huge presence at Quan Loy, but they had a tactical operations center on the Firebase in Cambodia. That's where the colonel would be.
And then would you go out to the Firebase and
go out to the Firebase, and then again, similar to what it was the previous October, wait till the log bird, the resupply bird would show up, and then I'd jump on there with any, the mail was the first thing that kind of went out, and then any business I had to take care of with the company commander, and I'd get out there and eat lunch with them, and then when the last bird was done for the day, I'd get back on, go back to wherever Firebase we were, and then
Now,
back to
if
normal.
they're actively campaigning, I mean, did you get shot at when you're flying back and forth? Was it a dangerous thing to do?
Uh, I'm not aware that we ever got shot
Okay.
at, but that, of course, you only know if they hit your
Right.
helicopter, I guess, or if the door gunners see the tracers or what have you. I am, I can't say I'm 100% sure because I don't know, but I don't ever recall being shot at. I was fortunate in that I never went into what would be called a hot LZ, meaning when you're doing your combat assaults, you're going in and the enemy is there and they're engaging you. That never happened to me. It happened to guys after and it happened to guys before, but it never happened on any combat assaults that I made that I'm aware of. At least we never had a hot LZ.
Right.
Whether they shot at us when we're going or coming, I have no idea.
Okay. Now, because of your position, did you now have a little bit more of an understanding of what was going on in the larger operation and so forth? And what, as you saw it, what was at the time, what was the purpose of going into Cambodia?
Well, I probably was like a lot of people. Again, my father was a career Air Force, but I believed all that palaver about the domino theory, and if we don't stop them over there, then we'll be fighting
But
them
on a
in
more specific
Kalamazoo.
military level, I guess is what I was asking.
Oh,
Why were you going in at that point? What were you trying to accomplish?
well, again, I think it's along those lines. You're just trying to stop the progression of communism. You're trying to help the South Vietnamese country that is trying to be taken over by North Vietnam.
But did you have a sense of what the actual military objective of the operation was? Or were you just going into Cambodia because it was going
Into Cambodia?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, well, I mean, we heard the president say what he said, and of course we were operating close enough to Cambodia that I don't recall that it ever happened again to any engagements that I was in, but people that I was serving with, it happened to them earlier, where they'd run across the border and you couldn't chase them.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you did, and sometimes you didn't. And a lot of guys say, well, we actually were in Cambodia, but whether you were or you weren't, you don't know. When we got the briefing, again, this was after April 26th, but before I got sent back to Alpha Company. The briefing in the talk was, we're going into Cambodia on the 1st of May, and this is, we're going to go in no more than 30 kilometers or 30 miles or whatever it was. We're going to be there 60 days. We're going to try to find as much supply stuff as we can find, disrupt what they're doing. And the only thing we know for sure is we can get you on the ground. We don't know if we can get you out. And so, Charlie Company was actually supposed to be the first company to go in, and then of course Lufapuza got killed, and then I went to Alpha Company, so that part didn't affect me. And then they were originally going to load the Arvins, the South Vietnamese Army soldiers at Quan Loy, bring them out to Francis, unload them, put Americans on, and then go in. And then I guess somebody decided if we do that, as soon as we let them off the helicopters, and they're going to run away, and we're never going to get them into Cambodia. So they decided that they're on there. They took the Arvins in first. But yeah, it was, strike the sanctuaries. And I, our battalion had a lot of people killed in Cambodia. We were probably the heaviest hit battalion of all of the, certainly of all the Cav that went into Cambodia, and maybe of all of the soldiers. I think there were 155 or something killed in Cambodia. And Charlie Company alone had 16 or 17 in just 45 days of combat.
Now, were you in that XO position kind of through the whole of the Cambodian phase, or did you leave before that? Or?
No, I was there the whole time. Again, my job as XO was to do the administrative
Right,
things,
right.
and it was just brutal. I mean, they were serious. I mean, as serious as the NVA were in South Vietnam and the April 26th and what have you. They were a heck of a lot more serious, it seemed like, in Cambodia, because I guess they had more to protect.
Mm-hmm.
And they were beaten up pretty bad, the enemy soldiers. You know, now, 40 years after the fact, I've done a lot of reading and I've done a lot of research, and the more you read, the more disenchanted you get. There was, if I forget the name of the book now, but I just read it about a year ago, but it was McGeorge Bundy, I think. It was a book about him as National Security Advisor, and the premise of that book was essentially that Kennedy was about to withdraw all the advisors at the time that he got assassinated. So had that happened, we most likely never would have been in there. And it's, I know a lot of people that, in a very close circle, and then you expand it a little bit that you know of and what have you, that were killed there, and it just it leaves me, and still does, with a sense of sadness, that, and not only for the American side, but for the North Vietnamese side. They had well over 1 million, I guess, by all accounts, and somewhere there maybe it was the cure for cancer or something.
Yeah.
Can't be so foolish as to think it can just be an American that can come up with the cure.
Now, was the XO assignment the last one that you had while you were in Vietnam?
No, I served for about 2 weeks as the acting company commander. George Lovelace went on R&R. Captain Bowen left about the 1st of July, right after Cambodia, and George Lovelace came in, and I thought, well, this is good, he seemed like a pretty good guy, George Lovelace, and then I was short. I was down to about certainly within my last month, and then I went out to the Firebase one day, and he says, well, next time you log, bring all your stuff with you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm going on R&R. And I said, huh? So he went on R&R, and I was back out in the field for 2 weeks. And we had, in those 2 weeks, we had 3 different firefights, and we didn't have anybody wounded, fortunately. But the interesting thing, the colonel that I'd had so much trouble with when I was the base defense guy at Quang Loy, he was now our battalion commander. So I thought, this is lovely. How can that little cloud, the pigpen cloud, be following me around? But I remember doing an aerial recon with Colonel Labrosi, and he said, okay, well, you're going to go here, and you're going to go here, and you're going to do this. And when you're all said and done, I want you right here. And he drew this little place on my map. And so we, George went on R&R, and I was out in the field. And we did our thing, and then the day we were supposed to be extracted, I was right where he drew on my map. And he calls me up, and he says, I'm circling that place. Pop smoke or something. So I said, well, where you drew on my map, and we don't hear any helicopter. And this went back and forth, back and forth. You've got to go to this location. I said, I'm at that location. You got to go to this location. I'm at that location. And finally he said, well, just cut an LZ where you are, and then I want you to report to me when you get back to the TOC. And I go, okay. So we made like a one-ship LZ and got out, one helicopter at a time. And then, of course, I was the last one on the helicopter. And I went in and I reported to the TOC, expecting him to just rip my head off. You know? He says, "I want you to know, Lieutenant Anderson, that was the best extraction of a rifle company from the field I've ever seen in my life. It was just marvelous. It was wonderful. It was blah, blah." Okay, yes, sir. Carry on. Then I left, and George came back in, and that was it.
So you never had any idea what had gone on? Had you figured out that he had the wrong location?
He
Or?
drew it wrong on my map, but,
Oh.
but I wasn't going to, other than saying I'm at that location, I mean, what more can I do? He can't say, go to that location on the map that I drew. I'm at that location. Shoot artillery. Do whatever you want to do. So I'd had that happen one time, too, with Captain Keene. He professed that I was at the wrong place on a map. And this went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, he said, "Okay, I'll shoot a marking round. You know, then shoot white phosphorus to a grid coordinate 400 meters over your head." And that thing went off right over the top of my head. And he says, "Did you get an azimuth to it?" This is a true story. And I said, "Well, my compass doesn't work when it's pointed straight up." Will come to you. It took him 4 hours to get to where we were. He was not happy.
All right.
But I learned that in jungle school. We got lost, horribly lost, on the map reading course.
Okay. That was, I've got kind of a few follow-up questions for some pieces. And the first one actually was, what did jungle school consist of and how useful was it?
For me, it was useful only from a standpoint of you knew kind of what jungle was like. It was a bunch of, there were classrooms and there were a couple field exercises, one of which was the night compass course. And there were 4 of us, dumb lieutenants, and I always maintained that I didn't A, have the compass, or B, have the map. I was just one of the guys. But we got horribly lost, and we were out all night with mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds. And one guy lost his watch. We were all it was like the Four Stooges, you know. And finally the next day, you know, it seems like they had a helicopter flying over, you know, yelling, "Where are you, dummies?" or whatever. And finally, you know, they found us and we found them. But it was useful to me from my standpoint more, the weather was beastly hot, so you again got somewhat acclimated to weather, although Vietnam was hotter, but and seeing what the terrain was like. But other than that, it was. And the other thing that was great was it counted it for your time. So from the time you reported to the time the school was over to the time that you got to Vietnam, all of that time counted. So actually I was somewhat lucky. I was only there not quite 11 months in the country.
All right. We kind of gotten to talk about the jungle school. You were pointing out that because that counted as time overseas, that shortened a little bit the time you had in Vietnam. And then my next question at that point was one of how much contact you had with the Vietnamese themselves.
Actually, very little. I mean, we had Hoi Chans, which were enemy soldiers that had gone into the Chu Hoi program. You know, they raise their hand, Chu Hoi, that means don't shoot me, basically, and they surrender. And then they go through an indoctrination program, and once they graduate or what have you, or deemed to no longer be communists or whatever, then they become what they call the Hoi Chans, and then some of them get sent back to companies as Kit Carson Scouts or what have you. So early on with Alpha Company, you know, we had a one, I think, Kit Carson Scout, and one of them got wounded in that big firefight in November, and then we got a another one. Some of them were just enlisted guys, and some of them had been officers, and in either the Viet Cong infrastructure or actual NVA folks. And then we had people that would come in the rear when I was XO, hooch cleaners or what have you, but out in the field, while I was out in the field, anybody we ran across usually was trying to elude bullets or shooting at us first.
So you weren't really in a populated area, particularly?
I wasn't, but before I got there, the company was operating up around Budap, and there were a lot of Montagnard and indigenous folks up there, so they had a lot of interaction, but that was prior to me getting there.
Okay. And what opinion did you have, if any, of the Kit Carson scouts or the Vietnamese soldiers who were assigned to you?
I guess I didn't have much opinion, it wasn't a trust factor. It just seemed like, he could look at a trail and I could look at the same trail, and, again, if it was like this concrete, and he would say something like, Buku NVA or something, Buku was a big word for them, and, if you were dinky dow, you were nuts, and if you were number 1, you were good, and if you were number 10, you weren't good. I couldn't speak Vietnamese and speak English.
Did they seem to be reasonably good soldiers?
Well, again, they're not part of the ARVN Army, so I've heard so many bad things about that I wouldn't want to characterize, except say, well, they were there with us, and if we saw some muddy footprints, how many went by, Buku, Fizi, and that told you nothing, essentially.
Right, yeah, a bunch of them.
Yeah, so it could have been 1 or it could have been 50.
Okay.
So I guess and sometimes you capture documents, and, if it was a Vietnamese as opposed to a Montagnard or something like that, then, they could generally read the documents and you could glean some information from it. But I wouldn't say they were bad. I wouldn't say they were good. They were just there.
From particularly the time that you spent out in the field in one capacity or another, are there other kind of individual incidents or things that kind of stick in your mind that you haven't brought into the story here yet? Or did you kind of hit the main events?
Yeah, I think that touched on the main things. Okay. I mean, that it wasn't always ugly, it was, I mean, one time we came back from a mission, coming to the Firebase, and our first sergeant had been a major in Korea, and he had been caught up in a reduction in force, and he was our top sergeant, and he used to have steaks for us when we came back. Where he got those, I have no idea, but Captain Keene told me, he said, "You're going to be in charge of the potatoes." What do I know about cooking potatoes, So I remembered when I was a kid that my mother, on occasion, used to boil potatoes in water. So I got probably a 155 canister, big metal canister, and from the artillery guys, and cleaned it out so there wasn't any gunpowder residue or what have you, and filled it halfway through with water or something, threw the potatoes in there, and boiled the potatoes. So, and it worked, and I didn't get yelled at by Captain Keene. So that was kind of just an odd thing. But
how would you characterize morale in the units that you were with when you were particularly in the field?
I would say the morale in Alpha Company was real good through all the platoons, because it's morale is a function, I think, of a couple different things. One, if you've got a good company commander, and you've got a good platoon leader, and you've got good squad leaders and platoon sergeant, then I think you're going to have good morale. If any of those are out of whack, your morale is going to be crappy, I think. Initially, when I got to Charlie Company, because I had already had a preconceived notion of Captain Boyev, and I had to do my best to only let that guard down, and the only person I ever let that down with was Phil. And we were very careful about that, because if the men saw that the lieutenants didn't have any respect for their company commander, then that could not be so good either. There was one other kind of, in retrospect, humorous incident. We were on Firebase Compton, and I had bad bowel issues that day, and Captain Boyev wanted our platoon to go out on a recon. And this Firebase was in the middle of a big, at the end of an old airfield, in the middle of a rubber plantation, and you could see for 600 meters almost in every direction. So I thought this would be a good opportunity, A, because I felt lousy, to let one of my squad leaders take the platoon out on they could read maps, so it wasn't that, and give them some training, because you never know when the film is going to stop, and the lieutenant's dead, the platoon sergeant's dead, and Sergeant McGregor, you're now in charge of this platoon. So, and I got no static from the guys that were going to do that. If I had, I probably would have figured out something else. But they said, sure, that's, we weren't necessarily concerned about the area or anything like that. So they started going out, and, they were calling in situation reports, and I was monitoring it. Just trying to get my bowels under control. The next thing I hear on the radio, 3-6, where are you? Captain Boyev was calling. I said, well, I'm in bunker 15 or whatever. He says, you wait right there. So he shows up about 2 minutes later, and he's just chewing me one side and the other. He said, I sent you out to do this patrol and blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to keep from throwing up and doing everything. I said, well, here's what I'm trying to do. He said, I don't care what you're trying to do. You're supposed to lead that platoon. You get out there and lead that platoon. Or when I tell you to do something, you're supposed to do it. I said, okay. I grabbed the radio, and I threw it on my back. I threw 2 bandoliers of ammo over my, then I started walking. Pat Hansen comes running. He says, where are you going? I said, I'm going out there. He said, you're going out there by yourself? And I said, yeah. Hell with them. I'm going to go. So I radioed the guys. I said, set up, put up security, and I could darn near see them. But you can't go out there by yourself. I said, are you coming with me? He said, well, yeah. So we'll get your stuff, because I'm leaving. So we went out through the gate. We walked right down the airfield, and we turned west and walked 500 meters, just like 2 guys, a stroll in the woods. And probably if there'd have been any VC or anybody around, they'd have looked at that. This has got to be a trap. There can't be 2 guys dumb enough to be walking out here all by themselves. So we walked out, sat down, and I radioed back. I said, okay, I've joined the platoon. Okay, let me know how the rest of that patrol goes. I said, okay. We sat right there for the rest of the day. Hell with them, So I tried to do some training, and it didn't work out.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned other people going off for R&R and that kind of thing. Did you get a break in there anywhere?
I did. My father by now his last duty station was at Clark Air Base in the Philippines. And I took my R&R in the Philippines. And his job was, he was lieutenant colonel then, he was in charge of scheduling all the planes into and out of Clark. And he flew over on the R&R, it was Air Force R&R plane. And I got on the plane along with 7 or 8 other people that were going to Manila, which was the R&R center. And they landed at whatever the Manila airfield is, and those guys got off, and I stayed on the plane, and we went to Clark Air Base and was reunited with my mother and my sister, and so I did my R&R, and everybody that went to the Philippines went to Manila, and I went to Clark Air Base. And we played golf a couple of times on the air base thing, and then we went down to Subic Bay, and then it was over, and of course that R&R flight was originating from Clark, so he took me down. I got on the plane. He said, obviously stay on the plane till you get back to Tonsanut or Benoit or wherever it was going. And okay.
Now, when your tour in Vietnam came to an end, how much time did you have left on your enlistment at that point?
I left Vietnam about the middle of September, and I was supposed to go to the 28th of March of the following year. There was a little snafu with my orders. I was being assigned to Fort Knox, and the report date was the 31st of September. Of course, and I missed that part, and I mailed it to my father, because I got that early on, 1st of July or 1st of August or something. So I mailed him a copy, and he mailed me back. There's no such date as the 31st of July, which caught on right away. Oh, yeah. So I went down to the personnel office at battalion headquarters. I said, I got the wrong date here. Oh. And then they changed it to the 31st of October. So I went back to, went home and went to Kalamazoo. My grandparents were living in Kalamazoo. I stayed there for 45 days or whatever it was. I bought myself a car, then drove down to Fort Knox and reported in, and they sent me to the reception station. First of all, I felt like a fish out of water anyway, an infantryman at the armor school. And then they, in my way of thinking, they had the audacity to send me to the reception station. I was hoping that I would go to a basic training unit or something that, I'd survived, and I'd learned a few things, and maybe I can teach somebody just one thing that they remember that'll save them. Well, you're not going to teach anybody anything at the reception station. And so I reported in to the lieutenant colonel that was commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Pugh. And I had on, my medals, my CIB, and what have you, and I was in my green uniform, but I didn't have the armor school tag on insignia, I guess, on my uniform. And of course, I'm standing at attention, and he's looking me up and down, and I forget what he was. He was a signal corps officer or something like And he starts busting my chops about I'm essentially out of uniform, and he said, weren't you in the Cav or something? Or no, he probably asked me. I said, yes, and I didn't have the Cav patch on my uniform either. He says, well, this was probably a Friday, he says, when you get back here Monday, you better have your armor school thing on your shoulder, and you better have your Cav patch on, you better be ready to go to work. I saluted him, went out, got my car, and jeepers, now what? So I drove back home to Kalamazoo, and I'd gotten a boonie hat at the 90th replacement when I was coming home, and it had a big yellow Cav patch on the top. Mm-hmm. And I asked my grandmother, I'd stopped at the PX and gotten the armor school thing. I said, can you rip this off my boonie hat, sew it on my dress green uniform? She said, well, of course. Mm-hmm. And so she sewed my Cav patch on and my other, and then I got back there Monday morning and showed up in the proper uniform. But they made me a training and operations officer or something. They had so many first lieutenants running around. Mm-hmm. There was a captain running the section and a couple of sergeants. And a friend of mine from OCS was also stationed there, so I was sleeping on his couch actually in the BOQ. I signed into the BOQ, but I was staying with Mike. And Mike kept asking me, he said, are you going to go back to school when you get out? Are you going to go back to school when you get out? I said, well, yeah. He says, oh, well, you're not going to stay in the Army. And I said, no, there are too many guys like Labrosi and Pugh. And he said, well, apply for an early out. And then you can start in January. Oh, okay. So I forget who I talked to about that, but they filled out all the paperwork and sent it in. Of course, the Army, hey, no problem.
Were they downsizing a little at this point? Yeah.
So that came through. And then once they knew I was going to be getting out at the end of December, again, I reported on the 31st of October, so by the time all of this is, it's middle of November. So they sent me down to headquarters company, and I was a XO counting paper clips or something for the last 2 weeks. I was in the service.
Now, had they made any effort to encourage you to re-enlist, or?
I had when I was in as a training officer after I'd graduated from OCS, I got this wonderful letter from Department of the Army. Some full colonel in the Department of the Army had, he said all these lovely things. I've been talking to your battalion commander about you, and you're the kind of guy the Army needs, and, we'll send you blah, blah, blah. I was only 4 months commissioned.
Yeah.
And this all sounded really great to me, So, all I had to do was say, yes, I'll go be interviewed by the brigade commander. Of course, you're not going to say no. So I went up and saw, he was busy that day, so I saw his XO, I guess. But, we talked, just like we're talking now. Well, I said, yes, sir, about 1,000 times, but I really hadn't given it much thought, but until it came time to get out, and then I thought, 11 months, I still didn't have a college education, this might not work, so I just decided to get out. But, they were kind of after me. You had to go indefinite, and then maybe you get a regular Army commission or something, but.
Right. Okay. Now, once you do then get out, did you go right back to school?
I did. Yeah. My official last day in the service on active duty was December 31st, so, they gave me like 2 days to travel from Fort Knox to Kalamazoo, so I signed out and went home. or went to my grandparents' house. My parents were still in the Philippines.
Right.
And then school started, either that next week or the week after, the first full week probably in January.
And did you go back to Michigan State at that
Yes.
point? Okay. So they'd kick you out, but they let you back in now.
Yeah, no, I'd been out, and I had, of course, to get the early out, you have to be re-accepted somewhere.
Right.
So I'd already done that, and they re-accepted me. And I had a whole different outlook on studying then. Again, prior, I was putting in the time, but I wasn't getting anything out of it, I guess. Or at least I wasn't able to translate what I did or didn't get out of it into exams. I never flunked anything, but 2 consecutive terms of straight 1 points,
Yep.
And then they had what they called a step scale at that time, and I was below the step scale for 2 consecutive terms. And as a transfer student, they
Yep.
tossed me. So, but I was re-accepted unconditionally. They'd changed the step scale, and it was something else. Of course, I had a 1-point average that I had to, and that took probably a couple semesters to get that above a 2-point, because you've got to get A's to bring a 1 to a 2.5. But it eventually got worked up, and then it was just easier, I guess. Then I was older. I was in a dorm. There was another guy who became very good friends of mine. He was a sergeant, had been a sergeant in Vietnam with the 9th Infantry, and it was a lot easier. It was a heck of a lot more mature.
Did you feel at all out of place as a veteran at this point on this campus, or was it just being a little older than most of the students that you noticed more?
No, not really. I mean, our hair was still shorter, and we all wore field jackets in the winter, or not all, but the 3 or 4 of us that were veterans on the floor. And no, not really. I remember there was some rioting and I want to say 71 or 2, or protests, I guess. I forget what they were protesting, but all the long-haired hippies were down there, and the state police was there, and we went down to watch, and they arrested a couple guys and threw them in the back seat of the state cruisers. And, we were telling, my roommate and I he was in the Air Force reserves, and we were saying, roll up those windows, make them sweat to death, and the cops were all laughing at us, Oh, we can't do that. Yeah, you can, those potlickers. But I forget what they were protesting anymore. But it was a big deal. I mean, Grand River Avenue was all jammed full of pedestrians, and cars were going real slow. The cops were beating on the cars to get them to speed up. But I can't remember what it was all about now. But we just went to school and studied.
And did people sort of generally know that you were a veteran or been in Vietnam? Or?
Probably because my uniform was my fatigue shirts basically, and cut off fatigue pants. That's what I wore to school.
But you didn't get any particular flack or anything from anybody because of that or whatever? No. All right. Now, what did you take your degree in?
My undergraduate was in general business with a major or what have you in management, and then my master's was in personnel administration.
And then what kind of career did you go into?
Well, I graduated with my master's MBA in '76, and '76 wasn't a great time for the country either as far as getting jobs. And it even got to a point where I was married by then, had been married for a couple of years, And I thought, well, maybe I'll try to do what my father did. You know, I'm now, I'd stayed in the IRR, the individual ready reserve or whatever. I didn't go to meetings or anything like that. It was just a paperwork shuffle that every 3 years that you want to stay in, and if the balloon goes up, maybe we'll call you, maybe we won't. So I wrote, forget who I wrote, some general somewhere, said, you know, I'm ready to go back on active duty. You know, I've got my MBA, you know, I've got all this stuff. I was regular Army at one time. And I never heard from them, of course. And then finally I got a job with Continental Can Company. Spent a year out in New Jersey and then transferred me back here to Grand Rapids. And when we built a plant out here, and stayed there, and then got reduced out of there, and then went to a small company over on 32nd Street called Alofts. They're out of business now. And then from there to another company called Bats Incorporated. They used to make hangers out in Zealand. They're defunct now, so a lot of the places I went to work for became defunct. And then packaging company out in Zealand, or in Holland, Bradford Company.
Do they still exist?
They do.
Good.
And got downsized out of there, and I had a lot of anger issues. And until I got into therapy, I really didn't know why. I always seem to have, which is not a good thing, have trouble with bosses that I always felt were kind of incompetent. And it didn't take a lot with the therapist to say, well, you know, you're dragging around all of your lieutenant stuff, and you're probably viewing these guys who may or may not be incompetent, but you're looking at them as, of course they didn't know the names, but you know, you're looking at them as like the Labrosis or the Boyevs or the Pews or what have you of the world. Oh. Of course, by then I wasn't working anymore, so then it really, yeah, this makes, I wish I'd have known that 35 years ago.
Right.
But, you know, many of us who've been diagnosed with PTSD, you know, we're able to function, and, you know, we just stuff it, and then, you know, sometimes at inopportune times, you know, it pops out, and then you've got a lot of fence building to take care of, and sometimes you're not able to mend the fences, and then you're left with, well, I guess it's time to move on. So, but you know, I've been married for 38 years now almost. We have one child, so you know, I never did drugs, or never was a drunk, or you know, somewhat the stereotype, you know, you're a womanizer, or, you know, never did any of that, or you're a doper, never did any of that, never smoked, ever. You know, but, you know, another part of the characteristic is, you know, you're a workaholic, and I was that. You know, I was always at work. And then, of course, you know, some of that, do this, 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 and this gets imprinted on your children, or child in my case, and that causes heartbreak and drama sometimes. And so I wasn't immune to any of that, but
And do you see positive aspects, ways in which your time in the service affected you that in one way or another turned out to be more positive?
Oh, yeah, I do think so. I mean, we just learned something new, or I did anyway, a few weeks ago in our group. I go once a week to group. Post-traumatic growth. And apparently that term, and concept has been around for a while, but just got introduced to us a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I mean, I think all of the training and all of the exposure made me a good supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't necessarily make me a great employee from
Mm-hmm.
this level down, but
Right.
from this level down through my subordinates, it helped immensely.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and I was tough on subordinates too, and I've run into 5 or 6 of them, you know, since I've gotten into this therapy business, and I've apologized to them, you know, saying, you know, I was tough, I was a bastard sometimes, you know, and universally they have said, you weren't as bad as you think. We're always harder on ourselves anyway, usually, but you weren't as hard as you think you were, and once we came to realize that you'd spent some time in that situation, then we kind of understood a little better. But almost universally, they all turned around and said, you never, sometimes, you know, maybe you were over the top on your criticism or how to do this or that, but you never did it just to just prove that you were the boss. You were
Mm-hmm.
always trying to make us better. And, you know, a lot of those folks have been successful too. But so I wouldn't trade any of it. I mean, I've had the occasion to go to Walter Reed a number of times and see the kids that are fighting the war now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's brutal stuff, to go there and see that. And it makes me, on a number of levels, it makes me angry that we're putting them through that. But it makes me sometimes feel that I'm not deserving of the benefits that I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting from the government, because not only are they going to have PTSD, but they're going to be going through life, you know, with, in many cases, you know, no arms and one
Mm-hmm.
limb and one eye or what have you. And of course, my therapists always turn that around and say, well, you know, they're getting their compensation too, and you know, yours is not obviously visible to everybody because yours is a different kind of a what have you. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, I resisted this for years too, this business, because I knew some people that I thought were fakers and charlatans and what have you, and I didn't want to be involved in that. And then finally one day it just dawned on me that, you know, you need to do this for yourself, you know, get some help, but you can't fix anything or help anybody else if you're just going to be on the sideline looking in, because the government doesn't care if Bob Anderson shows up and
Mm-hmm.
raises his hands for benefits at all.
Mm-hmm.
Government could care less because they've got 1,000 other people right behind me. So I did this I always kind of jokingly say I started this because I was tired of being a jackass all the time. And I see some changes. You know, I've been doing this for almost 6 years now, you know, the therapy part of it. But it does allow me to help other veterans, because I think I'm conversant enough in it that I can help other veterans. And I've been fairly successful with the ones that I've helped.
So are you involved with any kind of local support organizations or groups in the area?
Well, we have, maybe it's showing up here, we have a local chapter of the First Cav. It's been renamed to honor our President Emeritus, who just passed away, James Mason. He was an armor officer, but he was also a career officer, and he fought in Korea, was wounded badly as a tank platoon leader, and he was also in World War II. And so we get together once a month. In fact, we have a meeting tonight. And we do some social service out at the Grand Rapids Home for Veterans. Every month that has a fifth Sunday in it, we go out there and we run bingo. And so that's kind of a way to give back. And then, if we see veterans on the street, most of us, will thank them for their service. And, in a lot of ways, they have it a lot rougher than we do because they keep going back and back and back and back. And it's just brutal from this chair. It's just brutal.
All right. Well, you're certainly in a position to know something about that.
Well, and like I say, it's been because I've been through the benefit tunnel, I guess, if you will, and sometimes the government is not willing to help people get their benefits. It's not that they're unwilling, it's just that they're not willing, if that makes any sense. I mean, they're not hunting them down
Right.
and telling them what the benefits are. You kind of have to stumble into it. And I've been lucky enough to understand, I guess, how the system works, so I'm able to help guys from my old company, my Alpha Company group. And we've pushed a couple of guys in the group, our chapter group, to seek benefits, and some of them have.
All right. Well, on the whole, you seem to have come out of things pretty well in the end.
Well, I wouldn't change the whole military experience at all. The only thing if I was able to change a magic wand, is to have understood what PTSD was 35 years ago, and then I might have worked at one place for 35 years. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in and talking to me
Thank
today
you.
and for sharing your story.